Hey, my name is Steve De Jong. I'm the CEO and founder of VRIFY Technology. And today I have with me Ryan Melsert, the CEO of American Battery Technology. Ryan, thanks for agreeing to take a call with me today.
Of course. Great to be here, Steve.
Yeah. Well, let's get right into it. I'd love to hear a little bit about sort of yourself, your own background, and a little bit on the company as well.
Of course. So we here at American Battery Technology Company have two business units, both serving the domestic battery materials market. So we have developed an integrated system for the recycling of lithium-ion batteries. This allows us to take end-of-life material and waste and defects from many different stages of manufacturing. We're able to recover 11 different products that we then sell back to domestic battery material manufacturing companies to really help make a closed loop within the U.S. itself. And while closing the loop is important, because we have such a dramatic increase in the amount of batteries in the field, we also have to fill the loop the first time. So in addition to our recycling system, we also own large amounts of lithium-bearing claims in central Nevada, and we've developed our own process for how to recover the lithium from a specific type of sedimentary claystone material. And we're now developing both this mineral deposit itself, as well as our own internally developed refinery process.
That's fascinating. Usually when you hear about a lithium company, it's a lithium project or a resource sitting somewhere in a planet. You guys are approaching it from both sides.
Definitely. They're both needed to address our challenges, and there are a lot of synergies between the two. You know, a lot of the same fundamentals, a lot of the same skill sets of our engineers and scientists, and we actually sell to many of the same customers. So whether it's a recycled product or a primary lithium product, we sell the same chemically indistinguishable battery-grade lithium hydroxide product to domestic manufacturers.
And it's just looking at where that demand is coming from. It's all going to be domestic manufacturers for the foreseeable future.
Well, there's dramatic demand domestically, and close to 0% of global lithium manufacturing capacities in the U.S. right now. So of all these very large battery factories and electric vehicle factories you see announced, they're about 100% reliant on foreign source lithium right now. So the demand domestically is growing very quickly, and the domestic supply is not able to keep pace. So we're happy to be moving this project forward and to help contribute to addressing that imbalance.
Yeah, I think it's exciting for everyone in the sector, be it on the corporate side, the investor side, in any capacity, when you start to see some new buyers come into the space. And what right now you're seeing car manufacturers actually go all the way upstream and actually take positions, equity positions, often in mining and exploration companies. But I think it just speaks to sort of it's almost the urgency in all of these companies, or the pinch that they're feeling in securing supply chain or kind of things to feed their future growth plans.
Exactly. It may seem complicated, but it's very simple arithmetic to see the size of these battery manufacturing facilities, the quantity of lithium and other battery metal products that they need, and to see the fact that there's not enough material made in the U.S. right now. So this was an issue for the past few years, but especially with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act last fall, which really provides large amounts of incentives all the way down to the consumer level if they buy electric vehicles that are sourced from domestic-made critical materials. So it's really even further increased the demand for these types of domestic battery materials, and we're happy to be contributing to that need.
Incredible. Okay, well, let's get maybe a little bit more into your project specifically. I know we've got some visuals and some other things to go through today. So why don't you start us off there?
Definitely. So most lithium today is made from conventional resources. So that is either hard rock material, which is mostly in Western Australia, or lithium-bearing brines, which is mostly in South America right now. In the U.S., we don't have large amounts of either one of those conventional resources, but we do have very large amounts of lithium in something called a sedimentary claystone resource. So this is classified as unconventional. There aren't any commercial scale facilities that can currently recover the lithium from this type of material in an economic and competitive fashion. So about 3 years ago, we saw this as an opportunity. We started doing our own very small bench scale trials to develop our own internally developed process about how we could recover lithium from this unique material, how we could then purify the lithium solutions, and how we could actually manufacture a battery-grade lithium hydroxide product. So we started working at that bench scale 3 years ago. We were able to come up with a process that actually makes this lithium hydroxide product on a very competitive basis. We started working with DuPont to manufacture some custom media and equipment for us. And we were able to win an early grant from the U.S. Department of Energy for a $4.5 million project to take that bench scale data and to then build a field pilot plant. So at that time, we went down to central Nevada. What you're seeing on the screen here is near the town of Tonopah. We're just a few miles west of the downtown area. And this is where we found the very large resource of lithium that is held in this type of sedimentary claystone structure. So we began collecting samples directly from this property, having them sent to our development facilities up in Reno, and actually running bench scale trials, liberating lithium, purifying the solution, and making this lithium hydroxide product and sending it to our prospective customers, the large cathode refiners and cell manufacturers. So in parallel, we've been developing and validating the process to feed in this type of material and also developing the resource itself. So the red stars you see here are our sampling points to date. We have 22 different locations where we've collected material and analyzed the resources to different depths. So as we move through, we can see that these locations are geographically spread out, and we've been drilling between 500 and 800 feet for each of these locations. And because of our internally developed process, we've calculated that we can be economically competitive when we have about 300 part per million lithium or greater. So as we started collecting data from these different sites, we were able to separate the material. So the green here showing our minimum quality of lithium, so above 300 parts per million. The red is even more attractive, above 500. And then the purple, the most attractive, above 1,000. So these are our direct data points for a lot of different locations we've been looking at. And the important takeaway is for the entire depth that we've sampled, there's virtually no material less than 300. So the entire depth of these sampling locations has lithium in a form of which we can recover it in an economic fashion.
And
so
how,
as it went through
deep,
these,
how deep would that hole be? The ones we're looking at here?
So the one on the left, this one's about 500 feet, and then this one here is just over 800 feet.
And when you talk about extracting it, it's just one big open cut?
Exactly. So these are essentially the direct sampling locations and direct data. We were then able to take those data points and interpolate some three-dimensional contours for how this actually looks. So we back out on a three-dimensional basis. Again, now this is showing for our whole property the portions that are 300 parts per million or greater, which is the vast majority of our property itself. The locations that are 500 parts per million or greater, which again is a very substantial portion, not just in surface area, but also in depth. In some locations, near the entirety of our depth is above this 500 parts per million. And then we look at the greater than 1,000. So this is the very high lithium concentration that we see running in a north-south location on our property here just west of Tonopah.
And those it seems like the that high grade seems to really be focused around drill holes. So would logic be that if you did more drilling in between it, you're probably going to identify some additional high grade zones as well?
It's likely. When we go back here again, you'll see that we haven't yet explored the southwest border of our property, nor the northwest portion. So we'll have additional sampling going forward to broaden this. And then again, even at 800 feet of depth, we're still seeing very high lithium concentration. So our next set of sampling will also go to even greater depths, which can expand the total size of the resource.
So is this one of is a lithium project where it's not really, you ultimately end up being not even resource constrained when you look at your production profile? It's more about your ability to kind of build facilities and how much you can process in a year? It
is. So this set of claims is just over 10,000 acres. We finished our last sampling program last fall, and just a few months ago had a third party come in, analyze our data, and essentially give some conclusions about this resource itself. And their conclusion is that here there is over 15 million tons of lithium on a carbonate basis that is economically accessible. And their conclusion is that that makes this now the largest known lithium resource in all of the US. And beyond just having the resource itself, the fact that we're also developing this in-house extraction process to actually make our own battery-grade lithium hydroxide really works complementary to having a very large resource. So we've already sent samples of this battery-grade lithium hydroxide to the very large chemical companies, our prospective customers, and have received validation back that our product meets all of their requirements. So right now we're working in parallel to both ramp up the development of the resource and for the construction of our commercial scale refinery.
Fascinating. And the process that you have, and when you talk about the construction of the refinery and so on, that recycling element or workflow of your business as well, does that feed into that, or is that a completely different stream?
The streams are completely different, but they're very synergistic and complementary on a business case. So our battery recycling system, we're going through the installation and commissioning of our first commercial plant right now. So over the next few months, that will already be a cash flow positive operation. And then usually when you have a resource like this lithium one here, it takes several years to develop and to construct the refinery and to get your first dollar of revenue. Yeah. And all during that time, you're essentially taking on debt or you're paying interest on a lot of those financing opportunities. But because we have a battery recycling business within the same unit, we're able to use that to cover our ongoing operations and to use some of those profits to pay for this primary lithium hydroxide refinery system. So the two businesses are in very different timescales that really end up supporting each other.
And ultimately, when you look at how, whether it's debt, equity, some combination thereof, ultimately how you finance the construction, kind of having cash flow early on in that process to the benefit of the investor today, in whether it's sort of the benefit of less dilution or at the same time less debt on the company to build it.
Exactly. Funding a project with profit from internal operations is almost always the best way to go. So we're happy to have the recycling unit really helping to fund the development of this primary lithium project.
Yeah, and usually I think the other element too is anytime you have any sort of cash flow, the terms you can get on the debt, even if it's the same amount, are going to be much more beneficial to the company.
Exactly. The best time to bring in money is when you don't really need it.
Exactly. And then so downstream of all that, the ultimate buyer of either product, whether it's from this resource or from the recycling stream, the buyer is the same because the product is quite similar. Is that accurate?
It is. The product's very similar. And again, the recycling system is very quick to market, but will be somewhat limited in throughput going forward as large amounts of material come back from the field over many years. Whereas this primary lithium hydroxide resource has almost no limit. So 15 million tons of lithium in a carbonate basis. Just for reference, globally, all of last year, about 600,000 tons of lithium products were made in a carbonate basis. So this resource itself can play a very substantial role in providing all of the lithium needs for all of the U.S.
And so where, just on what we're looking at here, where does the infrastructure go?
Yes, and that's a great part as well. So a lot of mineral resources end up being in very remote areas where you don't have access to electricity or roads or a labor force. We are happy to be right next to the town of Tonopah, as mentioned. So this right here is one of the major highways in all of central Nevada. And then this right here is a second one. So Route 6 and Route 95 intersect right here, directly next to our property. And then you start to see right here the town of Tonopah itself. So this is a town with a very long history of mining operations, mostly silver and gold operations in the area. So they are excited to have a new type of mineral resource be developed near them. And then the other line is actually a high voltage electricity transmission line that runs directly over our property. And just a few miles to the northwest, there's an existing substation already in place. So we're in a very fortunate position compared to most mineral deposits.
And as far as access to labor and everyone else, all the other elements, as you go through sort of both the permitting, development, construction, and ultimate operation of a project like this, I'm assuming kind of being close to these communities is only going to be a benefit as you go through those various phases.
Exactly. The local community is, very excited for us to move into the area. We've actually had our own field office in the town of Tonopah for many years. So we already feel like we're part of the community. And there have been a few other construction projects in the area really focused on renewable power generation that went through similar permitted engagements with the local community. And the fact that those turned out positive is a great starting point for us.
Yeah. And I saw something about, I think a government grant. You mentioned the $4.5 million, but there's, I believe there's been some funding. Is it a government grant or there's been some other government funding as of late, more towards project development, correct?
There is, yes. So again, in addition to developing the resource, we're also constructing the refinery in the area. So the $4.5 million was to construct a pilot plant, a multi-ton per day system. And because of the early successes in that project, just this past fall, we were awarded a much larger grant from the U.S. Department of Energy. So this one is now to build a $115 million commercial scale refinery. And this is a grant that President Biden and Secretary of Energy Granholm decided they wanted to announce themselves. So they had a ceremony at the White House where we were able to have a discussion about why they feel this project is important to the future of the U.S. and about how American citizens are taking a risk and investing in us to help us bring this project to market, to help address a lot of those challenges I mentioned a few minutes ago about all of these multi-billion-dollar battery manufacturing plants being constructed, but without having any access to domestic-made lithium to feed them.
And that's a grant, a true grant that doesn't have to be repaid. There's no dilution to investors.
Exactly. No dilution. It's not a loan. It's not repaid. This is simply a investment from the U.S. Department of Energy to really make sure that this refinery comes to fruition.
Yeah, it's amazing that we're seeing more and more of that. It's sort of, you have this sort of energy transition that the world's at a global level, but also at sort of the domestic production, securing domestic production that just about every government is kind of working towards right now. Like some of these, it's phenomenal to see some of these sort of governments investing directly into projects that you would have seen that sort of 5-10 years ago. I think it bodes well for the entire sector.
It does, and this is one of the few topics within the U.S. that is truly, bipartisan. Members from both parties really do support this.
Yeah.
The common theme is they don't want us to move from a petroleum-based energy economy to a battery-based economy and still be reliant on foreign countries.
Yeah, great. No, that's super interesting. Congrats on all the success you've had. And anything else that we didn't touch on here today that's important for people to know?
I think maybe just that, lithium is prevalent in a handful of areas in the U.S., but when you look at all of the factors that are needed to actually have a deposit be brought to market, the location, the infrastructure, the environmental conditions, the local workforce, the USGS and a few other agencies have done studies throughout the U.S. about what are the real high potential areas. And there are only a handful in the U.S. There are only 4 or 5 that are really identified. And right here in Central Nevada is one that is likely the highest potential for the whole country. So we're just excited that we found this scale of resource, that we have been able to develop this process to recover economically, that we have the support of the government and the local community. And we're just looking forward to actually bringing this to market as opposed to just having a resource itself.
And if there's one or two things that anyone keep an eye on, the company should keep an eye out for in the coming weeks and months, what would those be?
I mean, we mentioned we went through our initial sampling program here. We will be sampling additionally in our Southwest and our Northwest, and then tighter groupings within the sites themselves. This really does give much better fidelity to this lithium resource. And like I mentioned, the important one is we're actually going much deeper in our future sampling holes to really see where this resource goes. So this could be substantially increased over the next few months as we go through that process. And then again, we are going through the design and construction of our refinery in parallel with the development of the resource itself. So going through the final contracting on this government grant and kicking off our formal construction project.
Got it. Exciting. Okay. Well, appreciate taking me through that. And thanks for taking the time today.
Of course. It was great speaking with you.
All right. Thanks, Ryan.